back with another daily reflection on the Daily Vedantic. And today's reflection is on the similarities between Vedanta and Buddhism. This is a question that comes up every once in a while, and I wanted to dedicate a daily reflection on this. Swami, in his books, he'll talk about Buddha as much as he talks about Christ, as much as he talks about nearly any lighthouse of wisdom that people are still talking about 2,000, 2,500 years later. There is an immense appreciation for the Buddha within Vedanta. Vedanta, as I've noted in previous episodes, it means the end of the Vedas. The Vedas being these 4 textbooks that sit at the seat of nearly all Eastern philosophy. You can find their roots back in these 4 textbooks, the oldest philosophical textbooks in the world. They go back thousands of years. We actually have no idea when the first ones were written, and they predate the written word to the point where we really have no idea when the oral tradition started either. But they go back thousands and thousands of years. One part of the Rig Veda, the oldest Veda, a part of it was dated back to 6000 BC. So suffice it to say, ancient. To put that in perspective, the first Western philosophers, the grandfather of Western philosophy, this guy named Thales, a Greek philosopher, was 600 BC. So in the East, they had been working on what is the right perspective approach, clear philosophy for living one's life for 6,000 years before we got to the first Greek philosopher. And I could do an episode on the similarities between Vedanta and Greek philosophy. Pythagoras lived about 20 years before Socrates and was Socrates' hero. It is said to have likely spent significant time in the Indus Valley in India. So maybe there's some overlap because of direct influence, or maybe it is just amazingly rare minds coming to similar truths. There are a lot of similarities between Greek philosophy and Vedanta. But Vedanta, which means end of the Vedas, that's where these books called the Upanishads sit. The Vedas are filled with all kinds of different things like rituals, how to clean a wound. There's how to clean and prepare food. It is replete with all kinds of different information for day-to-day life. And at the end of the Vedas, that's where you find the philosophical viewpoints of these ancient traditions, the Upanishads. Vedanta is Sanskrit for end of the Vedas, so it's just another word for the Upanishads. Vedanta, for these philosophical views, and after a few thousand years, you have this crystallized philosophy that might be summed up in 13 verses in one of the Upanishads. 80 verses, some, but all of them very short reads. But over time, these short, terse, cryptic texts then had ritual and rites added on top of them. Symbols. Humans just did what humans do. Start adding more and more cruft on top of the crystallized philosophy. And then it is said every once in a while, when culture is fortunate enough, we get someone that comes and gets us back to the crystallized philosophy. Gets us away from all of just the man-made cruft, ritualization, rites, all of the thousands and thousands of symbols that we just add on top of philosophy, and gets us back to that crystallized philosophy. And that's what someone like the Buddha did. Someone like Christ did. Someone like Muhammad did. Someone like Ramatirtha did. Or Ramakrishna. And the list goes on. And a bit more history before we get into the similarities of the philosophies. As Vedanta flourished in India, then you had Hinduism get built on top of it. Then we get back to the crystallized philosophy. Someone like the Buddha, he gets away from all of the rituals that distract so many of us from the root of an internal enlightenment. We get back to that crystallized philosophy, and as the adage goes, Buddhism is Hinduism made for export. It leaves India and enters China in a way that a philosophy can, but an entire culture can't. You can't export a culture. What do you eat? All of the different rituals, the language. You can't export a culture, but you can export a philosophy. The philosophy, which could be summed up within Buddhistic sense, 15, 20 minutes, can be exported quite easily. It leaves India and enters China. And then you have derivations like Zen that leave China and enter Japan. But if you follow all of this back, you get back to these 4 textbooks, the Vedas, and you get back to the crystallized philosophical views in the Upanishads or Vedanta. So what are the similarities between Vedanta and Buddhism? Well, you can start with the 4 Noble Truths, and the first being life is suffering, or dukkha, the Sanskrit word, could be maybe best translated as significant dissatisfaction. That life is significant dissatisfaction. Vedanta says this experience, this state, is a wheel of suffering, much like the Buddhists say. It is suffering. And Vedantins are often called crypto-Buddhists. Buddhists are often called crypto-Vedantins. But there is this root, that there is the foundation of dissatisfaction and suffering within this experience that either lead us to seek escape through material means or lead us to wonder, is there something beyond this? Maybe escape through spiritual means. Spiritual materialism, as one of the Upanishads says, attachment to the material world is great darkness. Attachment to the spiritual world is even greater darkness. Spiritual escape, materialism, that is as much of an attachment, if not more, than anything in the material world. But within these 2 philosophies of Vedanta and Buddhism, as well as Christianity, as well as Judaism, as well as Islam, we are told that we can transcend this dissatisfactory state, this suffering. And it is an internal pursuit. For both the Buddhistic approach, the Vedantic approach, it is inner work that's required to transcend this life of suffering. The next noble truth within Buddhism maps chapter and verse with Vedanta as well. That suffering comes from desire. Desire is the root of all suffering. What we are transcending in our daily practice, our daily pursuit, is not so much suffering as it is the cause of suffering. Desire. As one of my favorite mentors in the startup realm, Naval Ravikant, said, desire is a contract we make with ourselves to be unhappy until we get what we want. We think desire is loading up a destination on a GPS map and saying, that's going to be awesome when we get there. But what it really is saying, I will be unhappy until I get there. The further the journey, the more unhappiness we are signing our name to. Say, I'll be unhappy until I get what I want. It could be that ice cream after dinner. It could be that bottle of Jack Daniels. It could be that $10 million in the bank account. But when something goes from little thought, oh, I wonder what that's like, to then investing in that thought and creating what's called a thought flow around, man, that could be mine. I could have that. That should be mine. It then gets to a point of nearly no return where we can't stop ourselves until we get it. We have signed that contract to be unhappy in permanent marker over and over and over again. And that is the root of our suffering. So transcending suffering is really transcending desire. As is said in Vedanta, man minus desire equals God. It's not just overcoming desire and you're at the top of some hill with a beautiful view. You're overcoming desire and you're back to, as we're told, Vedantic lens, your natural state of eternal, all-pervading bliss. Pretty nice carrot to get us to listen to a philosophy like this. Take it or leave it. You don't have to buy any of that. Many people find so much value of just the practical side of Vedanta each day that they're not even thinking about that ultimate goal, or that ultimate carrot on the other side of the rainbow. But that is what we're told is not just possible, it's actually what we're told is inevitable. The Buddhists say this as well. Every step is a step towards enlightenment. You think it's a step backwards? You think it's a failure? You think it is a tragedy that's happening in your life right now, and it might be the force that activates you to wake up from the illusion that what you're pursuing is going to give you any permanent sense of satisfaction or bliss. That jolt that we get can be invaluable in our paths. Within Buddhism, you have so many different schools of thought. Zen, Mahayana, Theravada. You have Tibetan Buddhism, even within Tibetan Buddhism, multiple schools. But in addition to the beginning of the story of all life is suffering, and all suffering comes from desire, and the end of the story, and that is that none of this is real. This is all an illusion. None of this is real. That is the end of the story for both the Vedantins and the Buddhists. So what is the major difference? Well, the major difference comes down to what's called the Atman, the self, or the Anatman, or Anatma. Within Buddhism, non-self. So what's at the end of the rainbow of the spiritual path within Vedanta? It is the self, the supreme, the divine, God. And our path is realizing that we are that. The whole philosophy can be summed up in 3 words. Tattvam asi, that thou art. You're it. You are what you are searching for. That's what we are told in the Vedantic tradition. In the Buddhistic tradition, we're told that there is no God. There is no supreme, divine. That when we wake up, nirvana is not an experience of bliss. It is, as nirvana means, it is extinguishing. The light goes out, like a candle being extinguished. This false sense of self is no longer. And you have transcended the wheel of suffering within the Buddhistic lens. In various articulations, you have self on one end, no self on the other. You have everything that has ever been and will ever be on one hand, and you have nothing on the other. You have the vast on one hand, you have the void on the other. You could sum these up and reconcile these two, and this is why many Vedantins are called crypto-Buddhists and vice versa, with this simple reconciliation. Both philosophies sum up this experience as nothingness. This is so infinitesimal to reality. It is the limit case for zero, that it is essentially nothing. The Vedantic lens just might put a different emphasis on the word nothing. To be no thing and no thingness. There are not screens and words and people. There is not a diversity, a plurality in what is ultimately in both philosophies unity. And when you get into especially various forms of Tibetan Buddhism, they're saying the same thing with a slight tweak on emphasis. And within especially certain schools of Tibetan Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta, the school of Vedanta that we talk about here on this channel, non-dual Vedanta. Advaita just means non-dual. Within these two schools of thought, both of them being non-dualistic, meaning there is no separation between anything. There is only unity where we all perceive diversity. Within this view that there is only unity, to the Buddhists, they say there's ultimately nothing. To the Vedantin, they say, there is ultimately nothing. An example of this slight difference would be if I were to hold out my hands and I had 3 paper clips, a pen, and a rubber ball in it. And I said to you, what do I have? You'd say 3 paper clips, a pen, and a rubber ball. If I take them out of my hands and I show you my hands and I say, what do I have? You'd say, well, nothing. And I would say, what was holding all of those things and presenting all of those things to you just now? And you'd say, well, your hands. My hands are not nothing. They're supporting everything. From one vantage point, you say it's nothing. From another, you say it's that which supports everything and transcends anything. That is the difference in articulation, the linguistic difference between many schools of Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta. This doesn't apply to all schools, and it doesn't apply to from either tradition because, well, humans are going to do their human thing. I'll end it with how my executive coach, Peter Karniken, actually summed this up many years ago so beautifully, who is a practicing Buddhist, and said, to the Buddhist there is nothing, but to the Vedantin, that nothing is something. That's today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Daily Vedantic. This reflection is part of a free repeating 2-year course in Advaita Vedanta. Rooted in the timeless wisdom of the Upanishads, arguably the oldest philosophical texts on earth, you can begin with episode 1, which gives the 15-minute overview of the whole philosophy of Vedanta, or you can join the journey with any episode at any point. But the critical aspect of this course, of understanding and mastering anything, is to study and reflect, even for 10 to 15 minutes on the timeless each day, preferably at the start of your day. As is said in this philosophy, reflection is 100,000 times as powerful as listening. So listen, journal, sit with, discuss these concepts, or ask questions at thedailyvedantic.com with our AI-powered chatbot informed by about 700 episodes here, as regularly as one can if you want to see clarity and peace almost effortlessly unfold in your daily life. And if it doesn't result in a near immediate increase in clarity and peace, then toss aside and feel free to never listen again. One of the things that you might notice is after 7 or 8 days in a row, this doesn't feel like a discipline. This feels like a visit with a best friend to dive into the timeless with daily reflection. Within a few days, it becomes one of your favorite parts of the day. You can also find out more, including news about in-person events in Los Angeles and beyond, at The Daily Vedantic on Instagram or through our weekly newsletter at thedailyvedantic.com. Additionally, check out the links in our show notes for more resources like the books that are mentioned most frequently in the episodes, including Vedanta Treatise, perhaps the simplest and most straightforward read on this philosophy I've ever come across. Until next time, and from the entire team that works on the Daily Vedantic project, thanks for listening.